Following the formula put forward by Punch-Out, Retro Knockout VanillaBeast releases on April 14th, 2023 for the price of $19.99 on the PC, specifically Steam. It's an arcade-style boxing game that has a slight comedy and raunchy slant to it, but those who have played any of the Punch-Out series will be right at home here. But before I begin this first impression / review, this key was obtained from the developer for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Couple of things before diving in though. This game will only show up for you on Steam if you set to allow it to have adult content, which it does have. You can turn it off for those who don't want to experience it, and don't think this is a porn game or anything, but it does have graphic nudity and sex acts, especially in the beginning of the game. In addition, this is a critical eye review, aka my first impression series, because I've only fought about half the roster of about 30 boxers. There is a couple of reasons for this which I will get to later on, but keep in mind that I put about 12 to 15 hours into the game. It says like 25 on Steam, but I definitely turned it on and kept it on overnight once. So keep that in mind given this criticism. The game puts you in the shoes of VanillaBeast, a ladies' man who gets into a fight at a local strip club, only for a trainer to notice him, and now you're a boxer. It isn't a glamorous start, but it sets the stage for Vanilla to work his way through the various divisions to become the champion of the world. There are 30 plus boxers to handle, and while you can start at the bottom, you can seemingly skip fights by choosing them at the select screen here. So if a particular boxer gives you trouble, you may be able to skip them, as long as they are not the champion. Although, you also can't seem to go back to fight ones you skipped in that case either, so that's a little weird. And that's going to be a theme of this review. Functional, but also a little weird. Fights are set up for 2-minute rounds, ranging from 5 to 7 rounds. The controls are simple like its Punch-Out brother in 2. You could punch the opponent's body with your left or right hand with a simple button press, but hitting up, or holding it, will do an uppercut to hit in the face. You can dodge left and right with the appropriate directional input, and you could hold back to block, which will absorb a hit, but will also take around 3% of your health bar. You also can get a special punch if you get a PP point, and that does serious damage, but more on that in a bit. The core of the system here is hearts, which basically acts as a stamina system. Doing a punch successfully will get you a heart, but having it blocked will take away one. Similarly, dodging when you're not going to get hit will take away hearts, but dodging a successful hit will give you some. The thing is though, if you run out of hearts, you go into fatigue and can't punch, and thus you must dodge hits to be able to successfully punch again. So spamming dodge isn't gonna work, and throwing random shots when the opponent's blocking won't either, most of the time. Each fighter you face has a different AI pattern that is round specific, and emphasizes the ebb and flow of a fight. Usually a fighter will do some sort of combo, then when they stop, it is usually your chance to get a few hits in safely. Fighters, however, will give you a heads up though with a tell when they start the combo, usually dealing with a facial or body gesture to hint you that the combo is coming right now. If you hit them during this gesture, that's where you can earn PP points, but be careful, because the timing on this is very tight. Punch too late, and sure you may get a PP point, but the other boxer will start their animation and punch you and immediately take that PP point away. Go too early, and well, your punch is going to get blocked. And that's where things start to get interesting. One of the things to note is that an enemy blocking a punch does not, from my view, reset the timing of their punches. Like I said, each round the boxer has a specific routine of punches they follow for that specific round. For example, they may do the first combo after 8 seconds of a body punch followed by an uppercut, and then 8 seconds later may do a series of 3 jabs. It's usually 3 to 5 different combo strings that repeat during the round, and the idea in the early part of the rounds is to get an idea of their pattern and then punish them accordingly. When you know what's coming, it's a lot easier to get punches in and to maximize the time in which you can get safe punches in. Note, that's where the idea, I think, of blocking in the early going makes a lot of sense. Take the punches and see what they're going to do. But in my experience, it was actually less effective to do that than to just learn through experience and play around with the punch timing, because it made a lot more sense when it came to the PP portion, aka earning those special punches, to experiment with things. Obviously, when the game introduces that PP idea, you want to get them by punching the enemy in the face at the appropriate time. But unlike games like Punch-Out, in my opinion, the time here is so tight that you need prior knowledge of enemy patterns as opposed to just reacting to that tell in order to do it. And it's all about the length of that animation. See, I actually busted out the Wii to play Punch-Out to confirm this, and note the series of fighters on screen here and some of the tells that you can get those PPs off in that game. Note how some of those animations are 1 to 3 seconds, and it gives you time to react if you see it visually, especially in the early going of the game. Now, the Punch-Out for the Wii was a lot more generous in that case, but even if I look at the NES version's Punch-Out, it had a way to deal with this. If you got the star point, if you hit him at the right point, it generally reset the fighter and didn't have the punch come right afterward. Taking a look at the VanillaBeast first few fights and the tells, you'll notice how quick they are, which has its own benefits. You have to pay a little bit more attention, and it's a little bit more difficult in a good way. But note what happens in this montage. Every time I do get a PP point, in this instance, the punch comes right after and I lose the point. Yeah, I was rewarded, but immediately punished. Now, that's not always the case. If I punched early enough in the tell, I could easily get out of the way. But with how short the animations are, you have to know the timing of the opponent, and you see the dilemma here, don't ya? But you're probably sitting here going, Dragnix, you're ridiculously analyzing the gameplay already, and you haven't said if it's fun or not 7 minutes into this video. And that's the thing. It is, and it isn't. On one hand, I really love the fact that each fighter does have a reasonably different AI pattern, strategy, and way to overcome them. I like how the Jason fight, for example, basically has you focusing on not taking damage the first several rounds while you find his weakness. I like how other fights front load the first part, and then have parts that you can go ham. I like how some fights you can be over-aggressive or it punishes you for being over-aggressive. When I look at the game as a whole, I really do appreciate all the different fights, like the Macho Man fight, that made me struggle, but also gave me that sense of accomplishment. In the same breath though, the struggles at times really started to wear at me to the point where I was getting frustrated in bad ways. I felt that in some cases with the timing being so tight, that it really came down to me redoing a fight 3 or 4 times because I'd get far enough into the fight, get to a round that I hadn't seen, and then had to learn that round's pattern, and would usually take enough damage that I really couldn't keep the momentum going, and thus I would have to do it all again. That wasn't the case all the time, but I'm gonna have to deal with the elephant in the room here, and be transparent on one key problem that I ran into, which, despite not existing now in the game, did end up flavoring my experience. During my playthrough, the game froze several times for me, usually at key points in the fight, like the 3rd or 4th round of a fight, and it drove me insane. The fact is, I almost wrote the game off because of that, but I got in contact with the developer a couple of days ago, and he was confused. They hadn't seen anything like this during their testing. And then it came to light exactly what the problem was, which was not necessarily something that most people are going to experience, but with me, it was something I was going to experience. Many of you know that I do my best to put myself into the shoes of all the different players out there with my reviews. One of the more basic things that I do to test the game is use multiple control sets. So I'll bust out a controller, play for a little bit, and then change over to a keyboard and mouse. People have preferences, obviously, but with me trying both sets, it lets me give you info about how it may work specifically with one control set in particular for enhancer purposes. For example, I would say that if your typical controller you play on the PC is an Xbox One controller, then play with the keyboard and mouse in this game. Reason? The D-pad up holding doesn't always seem to register, at least for me, and at times it would make it so that I wouldn't be uppercutting when I wanted to, and the control stick wasn't usable. It was a lot more consistent with the keyboard and mouse. Now here's the thing, I would switch back and forth, and of course, at a certain point, the Xbox One controller I was using, due to inactivity, would go to sleep while I was playing with the keyboard. The thing is, the game didn't exactly like that at that point in the older builds. It basically would be like, oh, the controller's gone, we'll wait until the controller was reconnected. But in the meanwhile, while I'm playing with the keyboard, the game looks like it's frozen somewhat. The visuals aren't updating, although the music is still playing. Now, when this was figured out, they added a reconnect controller screen, which is really appreciated. But I don't want to say that the damage was done at that point, but you can understand that my frustration in terms of running into that problem started to bleed over to some of my other, playthroughs of the game at that point, because I didn't know exactly if the game was stable. And that's not necessarily the developer's fault. Apparently something Valve introduced gave them a problem, and it's not something that most people are going to run into. But I need to tell you guys this because, in general, it did flavor my experience of the game to be more negative than I think it could have been. Because even with what I find to be valid concerns about the game, they were starting to get to me more and more than I think they usually would. For example, before each fight, you have the choice to train for an upcoming fight, maybe giving yourself more health or PP points to start. You have a rhythm game that's always the same sequence for some reason, that takes a little bit of time, but at least if you know the sequence, then you can always be at full health. You can fight a shark that takes some time but gives you the biggest reward. Or you can catch this chicken, which is the one that I always chose because it got me back into the fights faster without having to lose points, because you could choose not to train, but usually you would go into the fight like limping. But choosing the chicken one would have you start the training with your trainer saying the one quote about you catching the chicken like you do with STDs that I got so sick of that I wanted to punch the man through the screen. You can't skip it, and it plays every single time and never changes. Just don't play the quote the second, third, fourth, fifth time. I am sick of it and I want to get to the fight. See, a lot of my opinions about VanillaBeast end up being, yeah, that's nice, but kind of opinions. Another example, I like all the references that are dropped in the visual of the fights and the boxers you face. I like that it not only takes Boxing World or influencer boxing references and plays them up, but hell, I love that the ref is basically the one from Celebrity Deathmatch. It's using media and it's referencing correctly. Now, there are situations where people show up that don't make a lot of sense, but you know what? Okay, fine. Jessica Rabbit is in the crowd. Okay, sure. But then with the presentation would come the fights with unique music. And let me say, there are some loops that you can listen to just fine. Something like the Punch-Out loop or the main loop of this game, fine. There are only so many seconds I can hear La Cucaracha repeated over and over and over again before I want to take the controller, chuck it across the world, and put myself out the window. Just for reference, here's some of the examples of music that you'll hear during the game. At least 2 of them. Get it on! The comedy is also hit or miss. Most of the things are small things, like the notes in a tale of the tape, but sometimes there are commercial segments that can get a smile out of you, or have you wondering what joke you're missing. In boxing terms, it would be like the Slugger. It goes for big hits, and sometimes it hits and you get a laugh, but most of the time it's, meh, okay, that was cute.
It's tough cause without the most you can make it. Your test results repeats itself. It really stings when you be. Never doubt that you're the best, even though you apply some creams. You're the best for now. STD's probably gonna get you down. You're the best for now. STD's probably gonna get you down.
Whoa, now there, boy, that's Colonel M.F. saying this thing.
Damn mother.
Why do you kind of sound like me with a weak southern accent? Well, sweet Moses on buttered toast, boy.
Now, with all that I've said so far, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that there's an obvious love for gaming, retro games, and for the medium of video games within this game, even when it doesn't seem likely with some of the things you run into. There's an obvious creative vision that the developer had that he stuck to here, and he was willing to take risks even if it wasn't conventional. Sometimes they didn't hit. For example, when you got low on health, the game would zoom in on your character and the other boxer, and give it more of a cinematic look. In theory, that's great, but when I don't know what my opponent's health is and the time left, it starts to become annoying from a gameplay perspective. Even if from a story perspective that makes sense. You've been beaten around and you're a little loopy to say the least. But there were legit moments in the game that actually surprised me, including one of the last things I played right before making this review. There was a story sequence where you actually take control of another character in a back alley fight that was extremely effective. To the point where I'm sitting here going, hell, why hasn't someone made a more story-based Punch-Out game that was effective like this? I mean, you have the story of Rocky, you have the story of great boxers, and exploring that and exploring everything around it, it just feels like it has so much potential. So seeing that in a little snippet here, yeah, I would love to see more of it. Which is where I'm struggling with the game when it comes to the scoring of this review. On one hand, this game is definitely not for everyone. You'll get frustrated if you're new to the genre, and even genre mainstays may have a lot of frustration. But on the other hand, the difficulty climb and the base rhythm type of gameplay of back and forth punching works well, even with the little things that end up taking your attention away. For every good thing, I can bring up a negative, even if the positives seem to outweigh the negatives in the end, despite my experience. But remember, my base review score is a buyability rating, and that's where I have to point out something. When it comes to boxing games like Punch-Out that are regularly available on the market right now, VanillaBeast quality does stand alone, especially from the gameplay perspective. Sure, it has faults, but it also does remind me of some of the days of playing Super Punch-Out and that retro experience. Sure, I was frustrated at times, but where can I go to get that Punch-Out experience right now? I mean, it's retro KO, and that's about it. And that's why it scores an 84 out of 100, making it a solid buy unless you're hurting for cash. Yeah, I know, many of you will probably be surprised by that score given this review, but the fact of the matter is, it's one of the only Punch-Out games right now that is of significant quality. I hope it stays that way because some of the in-game references and images it uses, yeah, it could get some trouble there, but if you need a Punch-Out fix, VanillaBeast is really it. Now, that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and matches a game to you. And well, if you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart, to see if it lies in the buyability rating for you. And this is where the game really starts to be very specific to a certain kind of player or not. The fact is, I don't know if I've had this many enhancers, and part of that may be due to my own experience, but yeah, this is going to be a game that's going to be hit or miss with people. That's it for this review. I may follow this up with a stream on Friday in terms of the day this review comes out, but I'm not sure yet. The fact of the matter is that I've done 3 videos in the last 10 days on this channel, 3 significant videos, and you have to understand, with the amount of effort that goes into each review, sales video, even the preview, that's a lot. So I would appreciate your comments in the comment section below of what I can do better in terms of these reviews, what you would like to see more of, and you could always hit that subscribe for the ability to see more videos like this if you're new to the channel. I do have a Discord if you have any questions about the game or want more content in terms of like what I thought of the game. You can ask me right there. As to what's next on the channel, I really don't know. I want to start Raincode in terms of that review. I want to review Greedventory. I've been asked to review Spiritfarer 27 times in the last month. But what I will hit next, it won't be a video for next week, that's for sure, because I'm exhausted. But for now, keep on gaming.